Welcome to the Kintsugi Heroes podcast, where we share inspirational stories of everyday people going through different challenges and how they overcome them. Please be aware that the story you're about to hear may have moments of deeply felt emotions and personal experiences. If anything you hear has a triggering effect, please reach out to someone who can help keep you safe. If you love this conversation, please like and share it with your friends so we can continue to share more inspiration and hope to as many people as possible. Now, listen up for our next hero's story. My hero today is John Milham, and John gave me a story like no other, a story that impacts every one of us as a human being in this life, and that is one of loss and grief and love. It truly is a love story, and looking at it through that lens, you can see the beauty in what it means to be a human and the pain of what it means to be a human as well. John describes his story with such eloquence and love and reverence, and I'm really honoured that he chose to share his story with us on Kintsugi. I hope you really enjoyed this episode with John Milham. Here we are on another episode. Actually, it's the first episode of Kintsugi Heroes, and I'm here with my first guest, John Milham. John, welcome. Thank you for coming.
It's great to be here. Thanks, Evelyn.
I'm so looking forward to this from our first conversation, and you know, this is all about stories, you know, human stories, and you've got a story, and that's why you're here, and I'm really grateful for you being here. So let's get straight into it, shall we? If you're ready to do that, let's
lead on, McDuff.
Can you take us back? Obviously, this is a story of adversity, and what I'd like you to do is go back to the adversity event. You know, the thing that happened, and first of all, paint a picture for me of what was really going on for you in life before the event.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting, the event, right? And it is, it's an apt description, right? It's a point where I call it's a come to father event, right? Right. So before that, I had spent 40 years doing my best to make up for the things that weren't happening, like a nurturing, peaceful childhood, and the bits and pieces that come out of that. What is not an uncommon thing, I'm sure, in Australia, right? Quite a dysfunctional family dynamic, right? My generation, I think, had that fairly commonly in place. In many ways, the product of our times, right? Coming out of, you know, our family were children in post-war and post-depression, and, you know, all that stuff. And limited in terms of understanding what we now know as core, which is emotional intelligence, right? So whatever that leads to, whether it's, you know, neglect or violence, or in many ways just really a sort of substandard, you know, education as a child, or an ability to be a child. What I generated, you know, some issues around that, but I met my wife, or to-be wife. I met her at school, right? So I sat in front of her in English. She didn't like me much. And then I was sort of, you know, a bit pushy at a local dance one night when we got together, as the kids would say now, hooking up. And, you know, it was on dodgy ground for a while, but then I took her out, did, you know, very chastely, and we saw the Star Wars premiere, right? We were at the very first Star Wars in 19. So that really cured things, right? So that was good. So we went on and were together, got engaged at 20, married at 22. And were pretty grew up together, developing a pretty solid partnership. What was impressive about that was my wife had been through adversity from a young age. Her father had died at 8. Her mother had struggled to bring her and her sister up as a single woman on the northern beaches, on a pension, right? So they did it tough. And she had these incredible, earthy, grounded qualities of resilience and understanding. And I gained so much from that association. So she really pulled me back from the edge of where I was heading. And she created the man that I was to become. The issue about that was, though, I had never been a grown-up without her. Mm. So we got married and, developed careers, bought a house, had all the boxes ticked. I was, I was doing quite well in a corporate setting. We looked to upgrade cars. We looked to upgrade, like we're doing, going to barbecues and talking about stuff we owned and, places we wanted to visit. We had 2 kids, 3 kids came along. And I remember my wife was not feeling so well. I went overseas on a work trip. And when I came back, it turned into something quite serious. It ended up being diagnosed as bowel cancer, and then everything changed. So.
And how long ago was this, John?
That was in 2006. Okay. So we had 11 months and 15 days of treatment, and then it got her. So she passed away in 2007. So it was on May the 1st. Our wedding anniversary was May the 2nd. May the 1st was the birthday of our eldest son. It was a couple of weeks after her birthday. And 5 days before, a week before Mother's Day. So it wasn't a good time. So for anything. And of course, I had no idea. I was completely, as an individual, as a human, I wasn't capable of operating on my own. I'd been completely, from the age of 16 to 42, I was a partner, a part of a symbiotic relationship. In many ways, she was the grown-up. And so, I was left without any kind of maturity with three kids. And thinking I was kind of a cool guy, like, capable. I thought I was, like people told me I was capable in the world, right? I had a corporate career. I was, involved in the community. I had, achievements under my belt. And what I learned at that point was that I'd essentially been a self-indulgent wanker up to that point, forgive the language. And I was left completely in my incompetence. And that was part of the journey I needed to undertake. Whether I was going to survive depended on how I then got through the next couple of years from a grief perspective, from a learning how to adult, so from an emotionally mature perspective, and just a pure logistics one, right? Can you imagine, my poor kids, can you imagine having to learn to cook at that stage and feed your kids, right? They were incredibly patient and actually they were quite encouraging, right? They used to tell me, it became a bit of a joke where every night they'd say, "Dad, this is the best you've ever cooked." And of course it was, right? Because the starting base was literally inedible. And by the time I'd actually managed to put together 2 or 3 items that didn't make you want to vomit, right? So every day it got slightly better. And so they were actually, telling the truth. Eventually they started enjoying meals, right? So, that was kind of a parallel to my journey, right? Eventually I started being functional and then actually competent. right? But that was, years in the making. And not least, mentally, from an emotional health point of view, I call it my crazy period, which is probably ending soon, hopefully. But one of the strange things about grief is that people gather around, and it's strange because I think of it as they gather around and they rush up quite close and then stand in a circle around you, right? Which is weird because they're super keen to help. But Australians are really bad. I imagine many Western cultures are really bad at grief. So they're looking at you going, wow, I really want to help. What do I do? So half the time, that circle of people supporting you are actually taking energy out of you. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because you're giving them a chance, making them feel better about being able to help you. So you're trying your best to help them, connect to you, right? When you have nothing to give, right? So it's a very strange dynamic. So I understand it. Many times you see people, friends and relatives, I'm sure you've encountered where they're locked down, right? Or they avoid, they go into their shell, or they pretend it's not happening, or particularly with men, often they, we'll put our energy, we'll hide in work, or we'll actually physically hide. We'll be away from our normal support or social circles. Or we become consumed. You see people being consumed by, say, exercise in response, or there are other, of course, less healthy medications we can take. We can self-medicate with alcohol or drugs, or irresponsible behaviour. Even I personally think wingsuit activity is one form of avoiding our mental challenges, right? I think it's an extreme use of endorphins, but that's just me. But
Tell me, so what did you partake in, shall we say, as your choice of, was it escapism?
It's desensitizing the pain. So you could call it an escape, trying to escape from what's real, which is at that point in time, your systems have shut down. So you're operating, if you can, I have an IT background, so I often think of it as a full system shutdown, and then an emergency backup system kicks in. It's running on minimal power with minimal function, right? It's like you power up your Windows system in safe mode, right? And I felt like that was the case. I had a facade of operations, but underneath nothing was working properly.
And how long did that go for?
Years.
Okay.
Years, which surprises everybody because people are very generous. I have a beautiful community, and they came to help, and they were physically, at one stage, my son, I knew he was doing okay when he started complaining no more lasagnas were coming through the door, right? So, a very, people are physically able to help, and that's wonderful. That's not, I won't put that down at all, but it's not, this is a deep emotional, psychological wound, void, not so much, a wound. It's actually a void, and it's filled by connection. So what I did was, I guess, I discovered that I was a contemplator. So I had a deck that looked over a beautiful part of Sydney Pittwater, and at the time, and I lack of sleep, so I didn't sleep very much. So I would sit there, and I had cigars and thinking. So I would, basically sit there most of the night. I'm talking 2, 3, 4 in the morning. Looked out over nature and smoke cigars and thought about how I was going to do this. And of course, in that moment, as you can imagine, there's some very dark thoughts. It's
Tell me tell me about that.
it's very
Please.
well. I need when you hurt so much, you need to decide, and there's no Panadol available, and I'd already chosen not to go down the route because it's very attractive, but I'd physically held myself back from drinking during that period. It was just too attractive, or any other kind of substance like sleeping pills or whatever. There were offers of oh, we'll take this, it'll help. And at the time, I felt the need to confront this, but at the same time, I had no skills or resources to call on to deal with it. So I just sat there and wondered what I was going to do, and I was desperately keen to talk to people and find out. So of course, the internet was a resource I had in 2007, up to a point. And there weren't many people in my situation at all. So anyway, I sat there and it hurt. It really, really hurt. I had no idea about how I was going to get through. So one of the things that I looked at was, I very, stepped through the process of what would happen if I decided to opt out, if I, killed myself. And it seemed like a pretty good idea. There were just, you can't, it's not about dying. It was really inconvenient to die, right? But it was about saying, well, I'm not sure I can live, right, with what's going on. And it's I now know that that's a position. Most people don't want to die. They just don't want to keep going with what's happening at the time. Yeah. So it was really important for me to talk to people, and a few people came into my life that had conversations. Interestingly, those new people became the most important people in my life, as opposed to many of the people I had every day before that. And many of it was driven by lived experience. You'd often get people who knew what was going on that would come in and make a difference. That said, I was lucky. I had a chance to bump into those people. There was no concerted effort to find. I didn't even know that what was happening. And then I was just lucky that I, at the times where I was most at risk, where I got closest to the edge of that decision, just, a stray thought or a stray encounter or a conversation, or just, to be honest, I'm grateful I was a little, a little wary of of, I didn't want to, the idea, I don't like heights. So that took out a whole kind of concept, right? So it would have been very easy to find the edge of something and go. But it was interesting. I just didn't like that idea, right? So then you've got to go through a whole bunch of other things. So it was kind of just a logistics thing and I was just lucky. I had something in me that just, whether it's kids or, anything, and the interesting thing is when you're there, I always think of it as I've got an idea. I work with people now where I recognize helplessness, hopelessness, and worthlessness as the thing that drives us, the spiral of thinking that gets us into that space. And I can recognize that in myself. What I think held me back at times when I needed it was a little bit of arrogance. I had an ego. So in that ego, I've refused sometimes to give up my worth, even though I felt completely battered by life and so on. At times, I guess I just hung on to a little bit of worth, right, which is kind of lucky. And that kept me safe for each moment because, they come and they go. And then, so when you're left, when you decide to stay or you decide not to go, more likely, you then have to decide how you're going to do that. And that changes everything. So as back to where you said the event, that was the point where I said goodbye to my wife on the bed, at her, as I watched her go. And I remember a little bit later looking into the eyes of my kids as I shared that news. And no heart survives that unchanged. So at that point, I had a new life to build and no identity at all. So, I had physically lost weight at the time because I was, trying to be healthier for my kids and all that. So I was like physically different. I certainly had no, my logistics, everything in life was different. And my identity was inextricably bound up with my working partnership with my wife. We were never planning to be apart, right? So we never really contemplated that. I'm sure she might have on a few occasions when I was particularly inconsiderate, but I'd never decide. I was never going to go. And just in a little aside, I'm sorry. It's funny that the moment when love slips away, right? That partnership, just during that period where she was very, very sick, and then going, I perhaps learnt more about what it was to be in love at that moment than I'd ever learnt before, right? So, like, it's such a, life can be such a paradox, right? Because at that time, you're probably, I remember basically never being more in love with my wife than at the moment that she was, heading out.
It's so beautiful. I've got a couple of questions for you, John.
Yeah.
How old were your kids, and how did you go with them during that initial period once your wife had passed?
Yeah, huge question. My kids were, so it was my oldest son's 13th birthday. So my kids were two boys, 13 and 10, and the princess was 5. Right. There are two things about kids. Like we often say they're resilient, and they are, right? But I would frame it slightly differently. I would say, given the opportunity to be, they can heal. It's almost like treating a wound with the best kind of treatment you can. It's going to heal up, much faster than if you fill it with dirt and all that stuff. Right? So the problem is the best kind of support they get is really often unavailable during a period of grief, right? So I said it was I was crazy. I was angry. I was indignant. I was really indignant that this had happened to me when I'd done, I had, put the hard yards in. I'd suffered, and then I'd come through. I had a bunch of boxes ticked, right? And I remember thinking, just, not too long before Glenn was my wife, before Glenn was sick, I was thinking, oh, this is it. I'm pretty much locked into my life now, right? At that stage, I'll go, oh, okay, well, I better give up the thoughts that I might, join the Foreign Legion or, go, do adventurous stuff like I just sort of tapped into that suburban life, and maybe there was a little bit of, resentment, maybe not. I don't know. I just remember it as thinking, oh, well, things are pretty locked in. And of course, then bing, right, the universe slaps you across the face. and it's the injustice of it all. Like I was the one who played up, right? She was a suburban saint, right? So good, put up with me and life and 3 kids, and she really put the hard yards in. And it was coming up to when she should have been reaping the benefits of that, and she was taken away. And the injustice of it, I felt angry and frustrated about my situation. I'm left here. I'd never signed up to be a nurturer. I was not a nurturer. I was if there was a China shop, even in the district, that was in danger, right? I smashed around life. So, right, it wasn't fair that I was now given sole charge of these, what I thought at the time were these fragile things. Like I thought of myself as a great father, which involved me, coaching rugby and, sitting down quietly when I came home from work to take care of things, right? Of course, all the details, I didn't know what a blue book was or, what inoculation went where. I didn't know how to, feed, what they ate for lunch or, how to get a uniform. I think my daughter, the first 12 months, she was 5. She was going to kindergarten, and I think she went to school with a hem 3 different sizes, right? Like she was, like up and down and, around and ankles half the time. I don't know. But, so how they were physically, they had their needs taken care of, fairly badly, but I did my best. Emotionally, it's true that they can heal quickly, kids. They're resilient if I'm giving them what they need. And I discovered that a couple of things. The first was I need to give, particularly Rebecca, my youngest, I needed to give them a sense that that I was grounded. So part of maybe what kept me there was not the fact that the kids needed me. I suspect I thought they might be better off at times without me being so angry and horrible, but they needed to know that someone in their life wasn't going anywhere. So, and that kind of call to duty may have anchored me a little bit. And then they needed ritual. We needed to find something that was stable, maybe create new family cultural, memes and processes and rituals. And then they needed me to become a better bloke. And part of when I stopped yelling at people and things and yelling at the sky at 4 o'clock in the morning, then I guess I stepped up to that challenge and I started to seek out what it was to be a better bloke. I don't know. Did that answer the question?
Oh, yeah. You said you had a successful corporate career. So at the time, through that last stage of your wife's illness, were you working less? Had you taken leave? Like what were you doing in terms of work?
Yeah, good question. I was so guilty. I'd been overseas on an assignment just when she was first discovering the extent of her illness. Right? When I come back, it was only a couple of weeks after we're back that she went in and was diagnosed with a tumor in the bowel and had surgery and started treatment. So I didn't forgive myself and I projected that onto work. So I didn't forgive work. So it was maybe about 2 years. So essentially I, just blamed work. So I treated it quite badly. The strange thing about grief is if you people are so scared of approaching it that even when you're, a manager in a major corporation, right? And you just go MIA because you're grieving, right? People won't even talk about it. So they just pretend you don't, they shut the door on your office and, they just say, oh, he'll be back soon.
Yeah.
yeah, so I did take a lot of leave. In IT, the world was, like I worked for IBM, there were 50, there were only a desk for 50% of the people, so you could work from home. And I had, I was connected with overseas, so I was often 24/7, so you could cover, right? So you could keep things ticking over. But, it was a useless process, right? The level of incapacity that you're carrying, you're just pretending that you're functioning properly. Particularly after my wife passed, I was completely and utterly just incompetent. I was reduced to the base level of incompetence. The only thing I was competent at was pretending I wasn't incompetent. Right? So I would just, oh, how you going? Yeah, good. Getting on top of things, yeah. Starting to come back, starting to get my handle back in the, head back in the game. And people were happy to hear that, right? They weren't looking. So they let you go, right?
Yep.
Afterwards, it was just a nightmare for managing all the things that were new in your life. So I didn't sleep for a couple of years. Basically, I would, I'd work late after I got the kids into bed and so on. I would start working at sort of 10 and finish at 4 and get an hour and a half sleep or 2 hours sleep, and then start, making breakfast and school at 6. Spent a lot of money on really bad domestic help. Couldn't pick a decent au pair or nanny if I tried. So we had some adventures in that area. It's actually a point of amusement with the kids now. So, some of our guests. You just stumbled through. So it's all a bit of a blur. A couple of years later, and I just started to open up, and that full system shutdown we were in, it's like slowly you start to get things, power restored to one or another systems, right? So it's almost like a staged open up, right? Some people call it a layer of onions, but I love the idea of just, I'm powering up another system, right? So I've got so I had the heart system coming back online, one sort of, application at a time. And so, there was the possibility of, being a single bloke now, right? So there's a possibility that starts to head into of a relationship. No idea, right? No idea, right? Just hadn't really dated. I was 16 when I met my wife, and we were together 27 years. She passed away on the day before our 20th wedding anniversary. I had no idea about any of that stuff. So, but the possibility, you might, and that's a whole nother level of hurt when all those systems start coming online. You get new issues popping up. Wow. There are certain things that you realize are now are too painful or too scary to go to, because the first time you try to access them, you suddenly realize that's off. You haven't repaired that conduit. And then I drove to work, and I got in the car park, and as I pulled up, right, I contemplated getting out of my car park and walking into the office, and I couldn't breathe. Suddenly I couldn't breathe. I'm just sitting there, and I had no idea what was going on. I was so freaked out by it, and I had this incredible pressure, that was sitting on me. The jaw was tingling, my shoulders were stiff. I had, I was perfectly still, and I did not know if I was going to be able to take another breath. And I'm thinking, I'm having a heart attack, right? So I'm sitting here going, oh my goodness. And there was kind of this peace coming over me going, well, if I die, it's not my fault, right? I can't be blamed for messing up the kids, right? And sit there, and then each breath you actually had to will yourself to breathe again. And I'm freaked out because I had no idea what was going on. And then I was just overwhelmed with this sense of worthlessness, this sense of, what on earth, John, the people you once put down for their, here's a cup of cement, harden the F up, like literally, that was my life.
Mm.
And now I'm the person I would be, completely, dismissive of. And I didn't know what was going on. I thought I was dying. And I sat there scared to move in case a breath wouldn't come. And it was 5 hours. I sat in that car just contemplating whether the next breath would come. And then I started to get confident that I could keep breathing, and then I was completely freaked out. So I was fuging out, and I just lost it. And I now know that was my first anxiety attack.
Mm.
But what's an anxiety attack in my world, right? You didn't have them on a rugby paddock. Mm. So, it was a strange and that changed. That really was a huge catalyst. Like, John, what's going on? And underneath that, I'm so grateful for that experience now, because unlocking the secret to that anxiety attack led me on a path where I started finding out what my true values were. I started understanding that there's a whole nother language to speak, and it was a language that women know well, that I was hearing from the people I had to talk to about my daughter, because I had a young daughter, and it's her friends and, became the mothers of her friends became the people in my life on a weekly basis. And they had this whole other language and this club that men don't even know about, which is called like a coffee and emotional truth club, and it's, and I was fighting about those things, and then it hit, and, I discovered that was the path forward out of my, anxiety. And to be truthful, that was the beginning of the end of me ever being able to work in a corporate environment again, because, giving up the values that I started to unlock, and once I opened up the capacity to feel as a bloke, I didn't want to shut it down, and I realised that I couldn't subvert those things anymore to go in and sit in an office and do what I now think of as unconscionable things.
Yeah.
But at the time, we're just corporate world.
As you speak, John, you've got a lot of wisdom, and you've obviously had a lot of time over the last 15 years for self-reflection, healing. Tell me, during that period, sort of, you mentioned that the moment you chose to stay, as in you chose to not leave this life.
Yeah.
And there was obviously a big period after that of healing, having that anxiety attack, figuring out your worth. What was it that helped you on the path back to, I guess, where you are now, if you want to call it a level field, or I don't know if it's still a hill what you're climbing. Was it a faith? Was it a belief? Is it people? What helped you get out?
Yeah, isn't that interesting? It's all of those things, right? And you talk about a hill. I don't like climb. Hills are great, but they're good to be at the top of. I hate going up, but I'm a waterman, so I think of it as like I'm out in a storm, wind, rain hit you. You can be out in the rain, but it's fine. You can be out in the wind, but it's fine. But sometimes the waves, rain and storm hit you, and you are just hanging on, right? And then it eases, right? But every now and then this wave comes along and smacks you down again, and you suddenly go down and you struggle back up. But then the lull, you're okay again, right? And it's like there's no rhyme or reason to the amount of lulls or the amount of waves that hit you or keep you down. So I often feel it's like that. Some days I'm on top of the world. Over that 15 years, what was I had lots of storms hit me. So here's an interesting idea. As I eventually started sort of, kind of contemplating and then doing something about a relationship, for me it was a few years. Often men operate a little bit earlier than that. They often reach out for a relationship because it's a form of medication, right? How can you avoid facing the big questions? Well, easy, you get someone competent in doing them, right? You suddenly realise, and here's where I was an incompetent, self-indulgent wanker, was you suddenly realise that I needed a domestic help. I needed a cleaner, a cook, a nurse, child care. I needed, someone who, I needed a therapist, intimate advisor. I needed a fashion advisor, a style, like PR person, right? Or a wife, right? Basically, all of those things, or a wife. Right? I understand the attraction in that, but I knew I had a really good piece of advice. A very wise woman once said, look, most men, jump into a relationship straight after grief, and it's always the wrong one. So I just decided I'd put aside alcohol and other substances, and also I included that in a relationship, and I just said, I'm going to work on myself. I thought I was doing a good job. But part of the learning is when you start to be in other relationships, right? Each one is different. So, like, to be honest, I experienced my first broken heart at 46 years old, right? And so, because I'd never had someone break my heart before. Because your wife leaves, that's not, kind of a broken heart situation. It's a complete, loss of, but you don't stop loving someone, right? They're not there, but it's not, the severance of your love. You grieve. I believe grief is about losing your future, not that person.
Yeah.
Because that person, you left for work every day and you didn't grieve them, right? You missed them. So I missed my wife, but I grieved my life. So you learn those things, and each time, what gets you out of it? Well, for me, I became addicted to research. So I spent tens of thousands of hours in those 15 years, either researching, the net or rabbit holes, or having as many conversations about this stuff as I could, often to the detriment of relationships with people who didn't want to talk about this stuff. I remember a mate of mine going at one function, he goes, John, it's really hard now to talk to you. And I go, why? And he goes, well, can't you just talk about footy anymore, right? You're like, why do you have to ask all these questions, right? So I was inspired to find out as much as I could, and I found, and it's wonderful that there's a lot of stuff out there. I became a seeker, so I also sought experiences, right? So I reached out at the time, and if I can take a moment, you talked about faith. I was a Premier League atheist, right? So I was an evangelical atheist, right? So I used to, before my wife got sick, I used to run around helping Christians get over Christianity, right? I would I'd convert them back to sense, right? So and the thing, I know it's a bit trite, and I apologise to atheists and Christians for this, but when I don't think there are many atheists on a crashing plane, right? And when the injustice of my wife's illness sought me to be angry at someone, and that someone was out there, the universe, whatever. So what we call it. And so, of course, when she left, I was just like, you go into begging mode, you go into transactional mode. So I'm transacting, I'm trying to, I'm negotiating with the higher power. And of course, once she's gone and you finally get over the anger, you're left with the concept of someone. An atheist has no concept of who they're they don't need to talk to anyone because they're not there. I now had introduced the concept to someone, and I went on a seeking spiritual path, right? Mm-hmm. So, and I tried all sorts of things, everything from, New Age experiences and, clairvoyance and you name it. I had a wonderful time, and I just found an amazing resource of people with different ideas and different, different wisdoms, right? I end up becoming a Christian, and that's a very, very powerful place for me, very strange place for the world to look at me now. So many people in my life, like my kids, are completely, amused by the journey. But it's about the place I got to allows me to walk in faith, which is faith is the belief without evidence, and there's such a freedom in that, because then I can decide to accept things in a way that feels, not speculative. I feel confident about being able to, accept things that are important to me moving on, right? Like, fear of death, right? Stuff like that. Because having gone through the experience, one of the things you do freak out about is there's the peace on in my wife's face after the whole process of dying, right? I just said, I don't really, I don't think that's going to be a good experience, right? So I now learn the mechanics of it. It's much, that whole end of life thing is actually mechanically required for a peaceful death. But I didn't want to. Anyway, without getting morbid, it's quite amazing, right? I'm allowed to explore my concept of spirituality with a degree of freedom because faith doesn't need evidence. Right? So that's where I am. And I don't mind other people being where they are. Right? So
there's freedom in that.
Yeah, but that's all part of the seeking, right? I just had experiences. That was an amazing experience for me, that faith experience, as well as many others, which I have loved learning from as I've gone along.
It's really remarkable to me, John, that it's hearing you speak about the depths of the tragedy, right? The injustice and the pain and everything that you've gone through. You've spoken so eloquently about the challenges that you went through on a daily basis and how you navigated to grief. And it's really evident to me that you are passionate about life today. And I'm sure it was very different 15, 14, 13 years ago. So I can see that you've found, uncovered inside of you this passion. You've got this seeker in you, and obviously that's something that drives you now. It's something that's come out of this. Would that be right?
Absolutely, yeah. And the further I've gone all down that path, the more passionate I've become. Right. The more amazing I discover. Do you know what? I think it's about realizing the beauty, like Neil Young says it in his song, like it's all the freaky people that make the beauty of the world. And I just think that's amazing right now, because it's become true that, as someone who has lost his space on the normal distribution curve, I've now gone to the extreme in so many ways. I've let go of the need to get back, and I've started to look at everybody around me and just really start to enjoy how that diversity can actually inspire me instead of scare me. Right?
That's nice.
And not only that other people's pain, I have a part to play in helping them. Maya Angelou says, if you want to find your purpose, look to your wound, right? So I say that a lot because that inspires me to remember. Now I have men love a mission. David Dida says, man must have a mission in Way of the Superior Man, and I embrace that idea, right? What's my mission now? Well, it's tied to my values, which is love and versus indifference, right? How I see myself becoming being a better bloke is actually about being more patient, more tolerant, more accepting, not about, being stronger, faster, fitter, higher, right? It's now about being it's a simple test. When I'm able to truly enjoy someone's win as much as I enjoy my own, I know I have reached another level of human capacity, right? When I don't feel a touch of envy or a touch of jealousy or a touch of, like when all that's out of me, then I'll know. I'll probably be long dead before I get there. But that's what I now seek, right? The excellence in living for me is now being a contributor, not a taker. And I'm inspired to help. So I found a simple message, and that is, man, life is tough, right? But that's the beauty of it, right? If you want a beige existence, then you can become wealthy and boring, right? And try to jump off cliffs to find your space. Guess what? The real challenge, the real extreme living, is down here, working with people that you would not normally feel comfortable with, or sitting when you want to do nothing but run away because someone is sitting there telling you a story that's so tragic, it feels like a hot stove emotionally, and yet you hold your space. That's a warrior in my mind, as opposed to someone who, is proficient in nunchucks. Right. So that's what I now seek, to be that emotional warrior, to be that mindful warrior, not because I want a website, right, but because I want somebody to walk away feeling, like just walking away, feeling like they're actually got hope tomorrow, or, they might be able to do like I was lucky enough to have done, and just keep bumping along. I've got all the problems in the world, and yet I haven't got a single problem. Right.
I love that. What a beautiful way to describe, I guess, the gold that you've mined through this last 15 years. I don't need to ask the questions or for the audience to sort of wonder, what did you take away? You've just explained exactly what you've got from this, and it sounds like you are a changed man for the better, humbled, wise, still on a journey, and giving back, which is just beautiful.
Well, everything is back. Can I just one last thought? And this, you get probably the single most significant piece of wisdom that I was gifted along the way was when I suddenly realized that the worst thing that ever happened to me that I would take back in an instant, regardless of what it cost, has led to so much in my life that I wouldn't give up for anything, right? And that takes away, you tell me what's good and you tell me what's bad, and I tell you both of them are meaningless. What they are is the life that I've responded to contains the gift, right? I have no money. I could be homeless next week. I'm the richest man in the world, right? And my kids are an absolute marvel and a gift to me every day. And I sat down last week and enjoyed every moment of being around them, except the one where I said, I don't get this enough, right? And yet, as a corporate high flyer, I spent, more time away from them than with them. I'd never be in this position if I was there. So I just know that good and bad's irrelevant. There are other ways to live.
If there was someone going through a similar situation, John, have you got a piece of advice for them? Anything you'd like to say?
Yeah. Next to you, maybe on the bus, maybe on the sideline of your kids' game, maybe in 3 cubicles away, maybe across the coffee table, at a coffee shop, is someone who contains wisdom you need and that will change your life. Conversations are the currency of growth. right? And you will grow the more quality conversation you have. So the next time you say, how you going? And somebody says, fine, ask the next level of a question down, saying, oh, fine. What makes you fine today? Tell me about you. When we do that and we find the people we're meant to talk to, and when we find the people we're meant to talk to, we learn the things we're meant to learn. Providence is there. It's on the ground. It's been gifted to us by whatever higher power we look to. All we need to do is open our bloody eyes and have a look and pick it up. And that means in connecting, like giving up the idea that we're the center of the universe and trying to seek that center by just starting to open yourself up to the wisdom that other people have. I don't know if does that make sense?
Absolutely. It really does. Thank you, John. I want to thank you for sharing your story with me today. I've loved every second of it, and I hope our listeners have gotten something really precious to take away from this. So
thank you for offering the platform. I really enjoy being able to offer whatever stuff's there. And all I would say is, I encourage people to reach out and, find help with us or find help with, on the person next to them on the bus.
Thank you so much, John.
Good on you. Cheers. Thank you.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Kintsugi Heroes. Please like and share the show to your friends so we can get this out to even more people. If you have a story you'd like to share with us, please reach out using the contact details below. Join us next week for our next hero story. Until then, keep being you, and remember that we are all heroes in our own unique way.